Well, hello. Today, what I thought I would do is not go over, but I wanted to do another little watch party. There is let me show you. There's if we share that one, there's a webinar that we did quite some time ago. March. Seems like forever. I don't really know. But you can see, I'll put a link to it in the chat here. You can go register for it and watch it, or you can, I don't know if this is okay since I'm skipping the lead gen, but you could just watch this video. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But it's pretty nice. So let's go back at me. And I've got the video queued up here. I just want to make sure that the stuff is working here, because as you can see, I don't have a green screen behind me. Nice shaky camera. I'm using the all new, very exciting StreamYard thing that we set up here. Yes. What we've got that annoying thing in Chrome. No, I'm sorry, in Safari, where it makes my audio come out all shaky, which, whereas in Chrome works perfectly, as always. So, yeah, like I was saying, you can check out that webinar thing. Let me put a link to it here in the old chat window, in case you want to see that. So webinar, I'll be watching. I like to call them talks nowadays. I mean, they are webinars. Who knows? It's kind of like people don't want a vendor pitch or a webinar, as you know. And my read of that is always that they just don't want your content to be boring, is what they're really objecting to. But all right, let me bring up the video here.
Good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar.
We're starting right off there.
Audit, how to prioritize and reduce the tech debt that matters most. Today, we're joined for the first time through the Tanzu webinar program,
he hosts all
Susie and Tyson. This is an interactive event, so please feel free to ask us anything using the Q&A box below the presentation screen. We'll do our best to answer any and all questions live during this presentation, but if we run out of time, we'll respond via email. We'll also be doing a live demo where you can reference some of these documents on the attachments tab.
That way you can hear my exciting commentary.
Now, without further ado, let's hand this off to Susie and Tyson.
Thank you, AJ. Hi, everyone. I'm Susie Forbath. I'm a product manager at VMware Pivotal Labs.
And I'm Tyson McNulty. I'm a software developer at VMware Pivotal Labs.
Thanks everyone for
coming.
And today we'll talk to you about tech debt audits and how to prioritize and reduce the tech debt that matters most.
All right, I'm going to be taking notes here.
All right, so here's what we'll be showing you today. We'll lead off with a case to talk about tech debt in a more productive.
We can skip that part.
Once the work to address the most repeat. At the end of this presentation, we hope you'll be able to talk about addressed.
All right.
So based on what we've seen for product teams, our process can be distilled down into 3 steps.
We'll find out what's in the presentation by watching it.
First, developers conduct an audit, which is a questionnaire about the parts of their software delivery practice that are painful. Second, based on the findings from the audit, developers and PMs work together to prioritize what work needs to be done now to pay down tech debt in the most consequential areas. We also provide a quantitative model that links reduced pain in the development process to an increased capacity for value delivery for your team. Third, once the work to address the most painful areas of tech debt has been achieved, repeat the process again. Conduct another tech debt audit to measure the impact the work has on your development practice and assess what work your team needs to do next. So Tyson and I wanted to share this case study from the most recent project we worked on together. This product team was struggling with delivering features quickly. And as you can see on the left, it took the team a long time to complete a feature story, at one point taking an average of over 400 hours. But in late September of last year, we introduced the team to tech debt audits. And using this process, we refocused the team to prioritize the tech debt that matter the most for their context. In this case, our goal was to help them reduce their story cycle time, or the time it takes from thinking of an idea to actually implementing it in working software. Ultimately, this helped them go from delivering a story approximately every 2 weeks to delivering a story daily, which was a huge improvement. So we want to refer back to the book Accelerate, The Science of Lean Software and DevOps, which posits that agile principles and practices lead to high-performing teams.
All right, let's go back a little bit. So these are the, I'm working on this book with Mark Zotner that we call The Legacy Trap, kind of documenting for managers and executives, like how to think about legacy software and modernization. So a case study here. So this is fun. Cycle time by story type. Right. This many hours. Whoa. Let's see. How many hours is 400 hours? I mean, how many days? 400 divided by 24. 16 days. Okay. A little over, as they say, a fortnight. So features were taking a long time. And then I guess iteration start date, what we're supposed to figure here is that because is that because they address tech debt? Why don't we watch it again? And this time pay attention to what she's saying. It's always a nice thing to do.
Third, once the work to address on the left, it took the team a long time to complete a feature story, at one point taking an average of over 400 hours. But in late September of last year, we introduced the team to tech debt audits. And using this process, we refocused the team to prioritize the tech debt that matter the most for their context. In this case, our goal was to help them reduce their story cycle time, or the time it takes from thinking of an idea to actually implementing it in working software. Ultimately, this helped them go from delivering a story approximately every 2 weeks to delivering a story daily, which was a huge improvement. So we want to refer back to the book Accelerate, The Science of Lean Software.
So in this little video thing you watch in StreamYard, it doesn't let you see the time code, which is fine. No problem. But what I made note of there, it's a pretty simple little anecdote, but is that by going through this process, we had, this one organization, customer or whatever, because they had too much tech debt, it was taking them several weeks to deploy just a story. So that's not even a full release. It's a story, which I don't know. You could think of it as a feature, a workflow. The way that people chunk up stories is all on their own business. But we'll see in going through the tech debt analysis how they sped up to be able to deliver on a daily basis. So, I mean, that's a good result.
And DevOps, which posits that agile principles and practices lead to high-performing teams. A team's performance can be distilled down into 4 leading indicators, the most important of which is lead time, also known as cycle time. And from our experience working with teams in a variety of industries, Tyson and I find that the teams with the lowest cycle times are the ones that put in a lot of effort into paying down their tech debt.
Sure.
So next we wanted to talk a little bit about why reducing tech debt is so challenging. And these are there's a few patterns that Susie and I have identified across the teams that we worked with from both developer and PM perspectives. So from the developer side, one big issue is misalignment. Developers vary in background, preferences, and experience. We're all different. What's painful to one developer, say booting a bunch of apps up by hand in order to test them, may seem completely fine to someone else, or may even reflect their preferences. They want to do it that way. There's also the problem of scope creep. For this, I like to use a gardening metaphor. So let's say you're out gardening and you see a weed that needs to be pulled out. Then you find 3 more, 5 more after that, and all of a sudden you've forgotten why you came outside in the first place and maybe accidentally pulled up a few flowers too. Scope creep, especially during refactoring, can feel a lot like that. It's hard to stop once you really, really get going. This is fine for gardening, but on software delivery teams, this sort of behavior can lead to reduced trust over time. For example, your PM might come back to you and say, last time we stopped to refactor, we went way deeper than I thought we would, so let's not do that again. And finally, assumptions. What looks elegant and clear to one developer, say some highly optimized computation reduced to a single line of code, may look like gibberish to someone else who's never seen it before. On a team, this kind of thing carries a little bit of risk because the code you write usually outlives your placement on that team. And if there really is a way to improve that implementation later, even if the current one is bug-free, it's going to be hard to change.
And from the PM side, developers often tell PMs that tech debt is painful. They communicate that it slows down their process and affects team morale. But tech debt is an abstract concept for PMs who don't usually work in the code.
Seems like they're basing what they're saying on a script that they wrote. What I should do is just get a copy of that script, and it'll be written for me. And with some attribution, I can stick it in the book we're working on or something. That's maybe a little too copy-pasty, but... They don't agree on what scope. They go down the rabbit hole. They occasionally introduce tech debt without knowing it.
Code base. While other constraints on product development are more overt, such as time and scope, internal quality is not necessarily visible. Next, impact. Product managers prioritize features based on the most important thing to work on next for the business. For every feature story, they write a business case which communicates who benefits from it and why it's important. But the link between tech debt and business value is not always evident. And because of that, it's hard to know how to prioritize addressing tech debt against features that have a more obvious connection to the business. And finally, causality.
There's your problem.
When a team tackles tech debt, developers might communicate more qualitative improvements. They might say something like, our test suite runs so much more smoothly, or it's easier for me to commit code. But it's hard to identify the direct cause between addressing tech debt and a team's improvements. So our tech debt audit solves those challenges. Through our experience as consultants working with product teams in different industries, we've used tech debt audits to solve the pains that make tackling tech debt so challenging for product managers and developers. Tech debt audits make tech debt visible. By getting developers' opinions about the health of their practice out in the open, there are fewer assumptions about the quality of their own work. Team members of other disciplines gain insight into the pains the developers are facing and can better empathize with their experience. The exercise also explicitly connects different sources of tech debt to their impact on the business, which provides PMs with more information with which to prioritize addressing tech debt against other initiatives. Tech debt audits also help align the developers' opinions on what comprise the costliest sources of tech debt. This practice helps them converge as a team and orients them towards the items that receive the lowest scores, as decided by the team collectively. This activity leads to smaller chores, which are activities to reduce tech debt, which ensures teams don't go too far into the weeds. By honing in on the outcome the team wants to achieve, the size of chores is bounded. And finally, since we run the same tech debt audit on a regular cadence with a team, it helps us make the connection between the chores we complete and an empirical reduction in our scores.
So there's some pretty common, like you see like an exercise or a meeting, some work like that occur a lot in, I don't know, this kind of in the way that Tanzu Labs does stuff, but software in general. And that is, let's go back just a tad. Oh, I guess it does. You can get the time code, sort of. Anyways, but there's basically, this is, you go through a step of finding things, right? So you need to have a list of what you think the tech debt is. So you need to know what those are. And then there's a by working as a group on it, you get everyone to understand what the items are. And then also part of the understanding is empathize is a little strong. You can empathize with the teammates and they're thinking of things, but it's more of empathizing with, I guess you could say, how it maps to the business, the meaning of it. That if it's negatively affecting the business sometime by, as they say, giving you long lead times. So you've got this better, you always want to map what you're doing to the business outcomes and the value. So it gives you that sort of thing. And then obviously the last thing is you need to prioritize and therefore decide what you're going to work on. But I think it's that middle part that a process like this, whether it's for finding tech debt or going over features that you want to add, or also in the modernization thing where you're kind of like looking over the thousands of applications and figuring out which ones to work on. Oftentimes when you have people from different parts of the organization, or silos as they talk about, you got to have some way of having them all, as they say, to use another idiom, get on the same page, understand what the things are, but also understand how to think about it, how its value, like if it's purely a technical value behind it, or it's performance, or ultimately why a user would care, why the organization or business would care if you fix this thing or did it. But that's kind of a fun. So you find, understand, and then decide. If you want to, that's kind of an unhelpfully vague summary.
Activities to reduce tech debt, which ensures teams don't go too far into the weeds. So why do we use the term tech debt in the tech industry when debt is typically associated with finance? Metaphors help us understand complex, abstract concepts in the digital world. A prevalent example is the cloud.
They should just take
so
that,
similarly,
that
the concept of debt helps us explain deficiencies in internal quality and their associated
Maybe
impacts.
They have.
Just like credit card debt allows you to buy something now, but with the cost of paying proportionally more later, we can apply the same line of thinking to tech debt. So in the same vein, taking on tech debt enables you to do something more quickly. It allows a team to deliver features with less time and effort now, but with a higher cost later on. While a team can decide to deprioritize internal quality in favor of delivering value more quickly, the extra time and effort it then takes to deliver new features can be thought of as a recurring cost on their debt. So let's put ourselves in context for a moment. So imagine that we walk into a planning meeting and developers are having a conversation with their PM to generate estimates for some piece of work under consideration. We hear a developer say, adding a field, 1 point, no problem. But it sounds like they're adding some field to an existing form.
Now, this 1 point thing, and they were talking about stories earlier. When you think about how software is done, you probably think, if you're not familiar with stories and this way of thinking, agile stuff, you probably think like, oh, it's a feature that I want to add, like print an invoice, for example. And you would think like how that's what I'm thinking of. Like I want that delivered as a feature. And for various reasons, software people doing estimations is always not good. It's kind of just a weird, it's hard for people to estimate things when they're creating something new and they don't know the problems they're encountering. Anyhow, to kind of remove like the time from it, like this notion of points is basically an idea of the effort behind it, the time and the difficulty, kind of the risk. You kind of boil it all into this point system. And, a team and an organization has to calibrate on what a point means. Does a point mean a day's worth of work, or does a point mean like 3 days of work? So we go back to time. But, eventually you kind of settle on what a point means. But here, this is as I like to joke, a developer can do anything in 15 minutes. And that is kind of what's going on here. Is it's easy enough to add like a feature, right? Like, in this case, it could be if you really want to do a print and invoice thing. If you already have a PDF generation thing, I remember I implemented something like this a long time ago. But you could basically say, any chunk of the UI that we have, like this invoice, we can stick it into a PDF and tell the web browser to download it. And, that'll just take 15 minutes because it's just saying this, when you click on this thing, take this chunk of text and generate a PDF and download it. And it probably would take more than 15 minutes, but, probably wouldn't take that long to implement that feature all on its own, removed from everything else in the process, that being the inner loop. Of what's going on there, the developer working on it on their own. So let's see what happens next.
And it's part of the product the developers seem familiar with already. Then someone else chimes in. Oh, except we'll need to handle state changes. It sounds like there was something that burned them last time that they thought this would be easy. Maybe there's a little more complexity than they anticipated. Mm-hmm. Okay, 2 points someone adds. But then someone else says, and we need to migrate the database.
It's getting darker.
And so the developer is not in respectful agreement. You're right, 3 points. It kind of seems like complexity is ratcheting up here, but we don't have the context to know for sure. Finally, someone adds, but it should have just been 1 point. This sentiment is revealing. Here the developers are having a conversation around the toil, or unnecessary complexity, that has emerged around delivering the thing that they wanted in the first place, which is just that form field. It should have been simple, and maybe it even used to be simple for this team a while ago. So let's talk about Toil for a moment.
Yeah, and here we're relying on the definition of toil from the popular site reliability engineering book out of Google. Toil is this manual, repetitive, automatable, tactical, and non-valuable work that we sometimes find ourselves doing as developers. So let's go through that just piece by piece a little bit. Manual work means, are you following some sort of checklist?
It's kind of like doing the dishes.
This team,
what you really care about is cooking
Susie's
food.
example is typing data
toil.
into their app.
Of course, doing the dishes can be
that's
nice
manual toil.
if you need an excuse to
toil
just
can be repetitive
escape
work.
and zone
Have you
out.
done this before? Our team said, easy, 1 point to add that form to their app. But could they have gotten that down to 0 points? Sounds like it's something they've done before that they might do again. Easy, brainless work of this kind is itself a form of toil. There's automatable toil. Can you make the computer do it?
Brainless
Automating
work.
means going the last mile and taking the human completely out of the loop. Hopefully, this team is automating those database migrations that they mentioned in their meeting. Sometimes toil is tactical. And here, tactical doesn't mean smart. The meaning is closer to reactive. Did you stop everything you were doing to do it? That context switching is burdensome in itself, but the real cost here is the inability to plan around reactive work. Production incidence response is an example of tactical toil. And finally, not valuable, doesn't matter. For tech debt specifically, the analogy I like here is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You've got to tie what you're doing to value. That's one reason it's so hard to justify tech debt reduction in the first place, actually. So how do you uncover toil in your process? Think back to that team meeting. We heard them express pain in their process, which hinted at some underlying toil. We could go back and ask more about that pain. And in fact, that's the basis for a successful tech debt audit, just asking about process pain. This works because asking about pain exposes underlying toil.
There's also, that's, you remember me talking about, the John Willis technique of finding out how things actually work. And so, I think this is a good technique. You just ask people like, what do you not like? And a second way of asking this is to say, more from a, I don't know, thinking of your business perspective, like what is a thing we should be doing in our business that we're not doing is another good way of kind of asking that, what's a story, to use the words here, that we should be doing but we're not doing, and you can expose that. And then there's also another way to find toil, and this is from John Willis's anecdote, is to not ask people what process they follow when they're solving an incident, or maybe in this case like implementing a feature, but ask them to tell a story of the last time they diagnosed and fixed an incident, right? So you don't want them to go over the official process that they have. You want them to kind of go into the narrative of like, this is something that actually happened, and tell a story of them following or not following the process with a concrete example. So that's fun.
Pain is a good proxy for toil. It turns out doing repetitive, brainless, non-value-added work isn't very satisfying. Who would have thought? So the first step to uncovering your toil is to ask about pain. We'll show you a few examples of how we do it before we take you through the full tech debt audit. So let's model tech debt a little bit. Here's how to ask about process pain. First, ask questions that span your software delivery process, like the ones shown here. You can only uncover what you ask about. And you'll find these questions in our survey, and we'll occasionally, when we run these audits, vary these questions from team to team if you sense there's some specific form of toil worth delving into. But in the end, getting a good span of relatively independent questions is good, or you can just start with ours. Now, this kind of survey format on its own usually works just fine to start driving improvements in tech debt. Once other developers take this survey and see the results and see that they're not alone in feeling pain in some category, that's usually enough to get the work to fix the pain prioritized. But we'd be leaving you at a loss if that's all we had to show you. We're all about prioritizing the tech debt that matters the most, meaning we need to weigh that tech debt against the other things that matter, specifically the value we could be delivering instead. So let's talk about how to quantify results from a survey like this. Our model uses a Likert scale for each individual question. If the questions are structured to represent your ideal toil-free process, like the ones in the last slide, then relative agreement or disagreement with the question will signal the degree of toil present. In broad strokes, full agreement with that question will mean we're close to that ideal toil-free experience. A 0 would indicate complete blockage, 100% toil, nothing ever gets done. Everything else is somewhere in between. Add them all together. I think the bars here shown in the bottom are a 4, a 4, a 3, and a 3. And you'll end up with an estimate at large of the total value to your total effort expended. And that's the single metric that you're driving towards to quantify and model your tech debt. If you can address the tech debt that positively impacts this expression, this value ratio, then your team speeds up. That's the mechanism by which tech debt reduction adds value. In the spreadsheet model that we'll demo a little bit later, we'll show you how you can estimate changes to this ratio based on areas of tech debt you attempt to pay down. And just to go back to that debt analogy for a second, we said before that the currency of tech debt is...
So we'll have to see in the spreadsheet, because there is, I remember when I scrubbed through this video, there are some spreadsheets in there, which is exciting. It's like, that's where the actual work of analysis happens, in spreadsheets. And I mean that obviously in a jokey but totally real way. So here you're just developing a ratio of that toil, which is fine. And then what are we at here? 15, 12. Let's go back. Combine the individual's questions. Okay, I think he shows an example of that in a little bit too. So that's good enough.
That you're paying back in this analogy. Okay, that was a lot. Let's pause and recap. You've heard us share our thoughts on what tech debt is, and we've tried as well.
Recap.
Wait until a time-sensitive incident.
All right.
So one strategy we've seen is wait until there's a fire. Some teams we've worked with push off addressing tech debt until there's a fire. For instance, they might wait until a time-sensitive incident, like a serious bug in production, to tackle their painful release process.
Don't do that.
Often the strategy is a byproduct of the product manager's incentives. Because product success is measured on business outcomes, PMs tend to prioritize feature work aligned to those business outcomes so that they can release those features sooner.
Sure.
The problem with this approach is that tech debt eventually comes due as incidents require immediate attention. This forces the team to work reactively instead of proactively. Yet reactive work is very hard to predict and plan around. Another strategy we've seen clients use and struggle with is doing a hard stand down. So this is when a team waits to address tech debt until delivery pressure subsides, such as after a big release. During a stand down period, a team doesn't deliver new functionality, but rather solely focuses on paying down their tech debt. Unfortunately, this often puts increased pressure on the team to deliver new features once the stand down period ends. And paradoxically, to catch up for lost time, the team might return to their risky practices and sacrifice their internal quality.
Yeah, there would be what did we used to call this? Every other release, every other cycle is like fixing bugs. Not every other one, but maybe every third or fourth one. And you have that's when you have those minor dot releases, when you put those in there. And, that practice can be okay. I mean, I think there's as she's pointing out, the main problem is like, if you just kind of randomly do it, and it's not part of the, pardon me, I didn't sleep very much last night. It's not part of the standard process that you do. It's not enshrined. Then it's like, if it's not like part of the way that you normally do things, it's easy to take advantage of or forget doing it. And then also another thing that happens is like, while you might be doing a hard stand down release, inevitably someone's going to want to put new features in there and things like that, just because some big deal was happening. And, a big deal, requires a feature to close. So, of course, you want the big deal during your hard stand down. I don't know. I think you could like institutionalize it a little bit more. But if you didn't have to do it, that would be even better.
Their lead time becomes skewed and they might lose their agility.
Not good. Don't lose your agility.
A final strategy we've encountered, which we don't endorse but does get closer to the tech debt audits we've successfully used on product teams, is to allocate a fixed number of hours a week to addressing tech debt. This happens when a product manager empathizes with their development team and wants to solve their pain around tech debt. But since the PM doesn't work in the code directly, they put a lot of trust in their developers to determine the most important debt to tackle first. The precise area of debt that the team is addressing isn't decided upon. Rather, the work is often tracked with the generic tech debt label. But unlike product managers, developers don't own the backlog, and it becomes hard for the PM to understand the impact that working on tech debt has on the product.
See, once again, there you go. That's one of the core problems of tech debt, and also legacy stuff in general, is it's difficult to understand the value of fixing it. And that's important because you're going to weigh it against things that are kind of easy to measure the value of. Like if we add the ability, let's do a retail example, always the most simplest. If we add the ability for someone to one-click repeat an order, like for shampoo or whatever, then probably we will make more money, right? So you know exactly what the value of that is versus like, oh, if we go fix up, I don't know, our build process, which just takes a little too much time to add a new library in there, then, you know, how is that valuable compared to, as pointed out, ordering more toilet paper by pushing a button? That would be actually really nice because, you know, you realize when you run out of toilet paper, when you need it, if you had one of those little buttons right there in your, as they say around here, in your toilet, which they mean the room, not the actual Commodore or whatever. But let's jump back.
Without knowing the details about technical problems the team is solving, it's difficult for PMs to gauge progress on paying down tech debt. Product managers then have to face skeptical business stakeholders who question the toll of addressing tech debt on the team's feature delivery. What's more, the developers never seem pleased with the work they've achieved, and there's always a new problem that needs to be fixed. Again, here's the recommended strategy: audit, act, repeat. Next, Tyson is going to demo this process for you.
Great, thank you, Susie. So now we're going to jump into a quick demo of both this questionnaire, the audit part, and the quantitative model that is associated with it. Just a moment while I share my window. So this is one of the materials that we've linked for the webinar today. This is a full tech debt audit that you can take and copy and modify to your degree for your own teams. And I'll briefly just take you through the questions. I'm not going to dig too deeply into any of the individual questions, but I do want to go through it with you and call out a few things. So the way.
All right, let's read ahead. Always a good thing. I have the context I need to confidently make. Okay, these are general. It's good for employee NPS and stuff, but let's keep going.
We like to open this exercise up is with some general team alignment questions. These help us get into that reflective mindset for the later questions. They don't directly measure the toil, but they help. They do help us get a sense of whether anything at the big picture level is off. So we might say,
nice. Jump in there.
Making microservices forever. And we ask a few kind of vision-related questions. Maybe we think those things are going pretty well. All right. So next, there's a.
Wait, what was he? What was at the bottom there? I am learning things that I look forward to applying. Right.
Those things are going pretty well.
Pretty cool. What's next?
All right. So next, there's these.
My workstation seems to disappear out from under me while I'm working. I guess that means you're in the zone, or flow state, as people call about now. It's a little metaphoric there, but that's fine. It's easy to get my workstation into the state I need, right? So this is like setup toil, which, you know, in lean manufacturing, and I guess manufacturing in general, it's kind of interesting because in lean manufacturing, the time it takes to set up your machine, right, to get ready to do whatever. I don't really know what I'm talking about here, but like I guess if you were doing some kind of metal work with a drill press or something, right, like each time you're done with a job, you need to measure the time it takes to set up to do work on a new part. I guess you kind of also have exit time. I don't know what that's called. But the actual task is just, again, I don't know manufacturing, but, drilling the hole. But you also have to set it up and take it down and things like that. So in Lean, you would measure those things so you see the end-to-end thing. But in software development, that's not really a standard practice to measure setup time, like what it takes to set up to just code and things like that. But getting to that point is a lot of what people are always talking about when they want to improve software. So I figure that's what we'll be going over here. And what aspect of your workstation setup is painful? Oh, freeform. I love freeform answers in surveys. That's the best.
Categories kind of span the development process, like I said before. They're grouped into sections such as workstation setup here. So these questions are geared to gauge alignment to that ideal toil-free experience around like workstation setup. So let's say that this is going rather well for this developer. They don't have much to say about what's painful. And then maybe they're having a little bit more trouble running things locally. It's hard to boot.
Okay. It's easy to run software on my workstation. I can boot software up in the state that I need, right? So more setup stuff here.
All of our microservices up. We like to include that feedback form, but it's marked optional because often there's not much to say about it. But when there is something to say, it can often be a good set of things to follow up on to start generating those actions for your team to address those riskier areas. So just briefly, I want to show you a few of the other categories. We like to ask about testing and coding. We like to ask about how it's going integrating with other teams.
Oh, now I need to go back because I zoned out.
Form, but it's marked off. Span the development process, like I said before.
Oh no, I went too far.
To say,
like I said, I didn't get much sleep last night.
Be a good set of things to follow up on to start generating.
So it's easy to run. These are pretty good questions. Tests are stable. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like these are common tech debt problems you would have. Again, like nothing about features, but the process that you're following. Writing and reading, navigating tests. Go to testing. Got to have tests because you probably remember Michael Feather's definition of legacy software from 2001 or something, which is his very overly clever in it. It's software that doesn't have tests. That means it's hard to change it without knowing if you broke something. And therefore, you often don't change it, and then it becomes legacy stuff that you don't ever want to touch. Coté's definition of legacy software is software that you want to change, but you're afraid to change, whether it has tests or not. Because otherwise you would just call it your software, right? If you weren't afraid to change it, you just think of it as normal software, not legacy software or whatever. I just referenced myself in the third person there. That was fun.
Those actions for your team to address those riskier areas. So just briefly, I want to show you a few of the other categories. We like to ask about testing and coding.
Our code does pretty much what I expect it to do upon reading it. These are great questions. And I love the casualness they're written in. I can track down code I want and modify with minimal guesswork. Our code has a good modularity. I can make targeted contain changes. Sure. And then just freeform answer.
We like to ask about how it's going integrating with other teams.
Timely. Okay. This is good process stuff. Yeah, these are fun.
We like to ask, is there any pain around merging work together, assuming there's sort of multiple tracks of work happening on this team at the same time? We like to ask about the release process here. And we like to ask, like, how are we doing with production support of our software? So that'll get submitted. And then this survey, this example is actually backed by this model already. I can sort of show you that.
So now we're getting into the fun stuff, but this is something for you marketing people out there who are, I'm sure, listening. Like whenever you have I would have to go look, but whenever you do like a webinar or an overview or something like this, it's great to have like a tool, a thing that you leave behind, right? So, one of the things that would be cool if I did it here, so that I could have a little lead gen form that people who watch this could click on, and we can, know more about you. But would be like, if you want to, you can download the survey questions here, or here's a link to a Google survey that you can just easily copy or whatever. But it would be a good starter thing, right? Like you could start with that survey just like right away and say like, oh, tomorrow I'm gonna get an assessment of the tech debt that we have, and you could run off and go do that. Whereas if you don't provide just that as a tool after an event like this, people like me, like I would do this kind of thing. I would just go in and have to construct my own survey from taking screenshots of this. I guess now with the new iOS thing, you could do some text recognition on there and select it, so it wouldn't be that bad. But that's always a nice thing when you create an asset, as they say. A thing like this is to have that kit out there. Maybe we'll try to put that in the legacy trap. We'll kind of have a link to these surveys that you can download, because I think I bet the results are pretty nice. Let's find out.
Our recent responses have already appeared and are factoring into this model. Give me just a moment to lay the screen out for a bit.
Let me blow this up.
So now you'll see some of those scores are aggregated here.
Get my face out of the way.
You can go through sort of in the content on the right of this spreadsheet and see generally what people are scoring. This row here aggregates those scores into a single score for each of these categories. It can be nice to zoom in, but this is actually kind of the level that I like to work with teams at to determine what's going on. So this will tell us at a high level that this team is having trouble writing, reading, and navigating tests. Those are sort of the lowest scores there. I'm going to delete that for a moment. Over here, you'll see the team's value ratio, that red to green value versus toil that we showed earlier, kind of expressed as a single number here.
Right. And then if you started sorting by that, you could kind of plan what to do
their
next.
Tech debt, of course, is to increase this ratio. If this ratio were 100%, that would mean everyone scored 5s on this survey. So the other part of this model that I've found some use in is a section of it where you can sort of estimate, let's say if we were going to get everybody's scores up to an average of 4 in this category, the spreadsheet will crunch the numbers and sort of generate what your value ratio would be.
Sure.
And you can use the difference between this hypothetical value ratio and your current score to start to do what we said earlier, which was gauge the value of doing this tech debt reduction versus the value of doing more feature delivery. So let's say this team was delivering.
Okay, so here we've asked the developers and the people on the team things like their sentiment about like it's easy for me to get my machine set up to start working on a feature, and they answer on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being no, it's not easy, 5 being like sure, it's great, it just happens automatically. And then we're going to estimate. So then you had a value ratio. It's kind of the ratio between good and bad there. So far we don't have time in there. And then we're saying we're going to say if we improve things, that gives us more story points or less story points that we can do. So then you can start to value the tech debt based on the reduction in story points capacity. So you kind of value, and therefore you value solving tech debt by it gives you more capacity. It allows you to put more features in. So you can kind of start to weigh, and at that point you're just weighing potential to actual features you delivered. So you might say like, all right, we could put that one button thing in, but if we put that one button thing in, instead of addressing this tech debt that we have, we won't be able to do as many feature releases in the next release, even though we put this one button ordering thing in, or something like that. So let's see if that weighs out, because that would be a fun way. That's a way of putting value on something that you kind of intuitively do in your head, but it's hard to express. You're valuing capacity, adding new capacity in the same way you would value like building out a store or something, building out a new gas station because you want to just be able to sell more gas because you have more stores or something.
12 points per iteration. Then working on some chore around tech debt reduction and getting everyone's scores up to this place would represent a change of almost a point per planning period. So pretty powerful. Alternatively, if they were going to focus on improving the way they boot up their software here, the scores are still low there, but not.
Well, now that, we'd have to look at the spreadsheet. The question is like, what? I guess you have to assign time to those values per developer. Yeah, like how do you map between is that an average? Oh, it's up there, sort of, but that's a lot of work to go sort that out. So what are they doing? If not is blank. I don't know. I'm not going to read that.
Nearly as low. So maybe this isn't the thing to prioritize right now unless we have a really long-term perspective. Mm-hmm. Now, over time, these scores will change, and maybe your team will happily start delivering more points per iteration.
Happily.
If the team were delivering 25 points, you might consider making this practice even healthier. You're going to see a return on that, on that investment over time pretty soon. All right, so that concludes the sort of live demo here.
Hey, there they are.
We'll go back to the presentation.
Great, thank you, Tyson. All right, so at this point, you've gotten all of this feedback. You use the calculator to determine the categories of tech debt you want to focus on. And in this next section, we'll go through some of the options that have worked for us and our clients in each category. So we've grouped these into two categories. First, tactical things that you can start doing today that you can try as an experiment to see if they work for you. They should have a fast payoff, and if not, you can change direction quickly. Second, strategic things that might require some planning or investment or represent some sort of cultural shift that can't be undertaken overnight. These have a big payoff down the line, mostly because they incentivize good tactical patterns once they are in place. So we actually have a special name for stories that do not deliver business value, and that's chores. Chores do not have observable consequences for the user, and they therefore can't be accepted by the PM. Some common examples of chores you might find on a product team are things such as fixing flaky tests, setting up workstations, and planned refactoring, which are exactly the kind of things that might come out of a tech debt audit. So following a tech debt audit, I, as a PM, work with the developer on my team to write the chores that emerge in our team's backlog. And this format is really helpful for me to understand which specific tech debt audit category or categories we think completing this chore will improve, the specific activity that needs to be achieved to have that expected improvement, and the impact we think this activity will have on our product. As a PM, this gives me the information I need to prioritize chores against features and bugs, and also justify the importance of this work to my business stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
So here are just some examples of how you might fill out this template based on the findings of your tech debt audit. So for instance, if your team determines that the most painful part of your development practice is your release process, you might hypothesize that adding linting to your CI pipeline will help you catch code style errors before they're integrated. Or if you have low scores in production support, you might expect that running multiple instances of your app in acceptance will allow you to discover session persistence problems earlier.
So we want to go through a few kind of tips in each category. The kinds of chores that we've prioritized for various teams. So in this workstation setup category, some things that I'll look to first are we scripting our most common workflows to set up our workstation? Do we have an automated way of installing all the software we need? And sometimes it's as simple as standardizing on what editor we want to use. And some editors will even allow you to check that configuration into source control so that everyone's experience is always up to date and consistent. And I think some really kind of long-term changes that can help here are something we do a lot at Pivotal Labs, which is re-imaging and rotating our hardware pretty often. So when you do that, you get really good at, you incentivize this behavior of installing and setting up workstations quickly. And you have less chance of workstations sort of getting into a unique configuration that's hard to reproduce. If you combine this with sort of administrative tools and a balanced hardware administration strategy that lets developers kind of configure and reinstall and improve these processes on their own, we've seen a lot of really good power come out of this. So next, when you're running the software locally, things you can do today are sort of get good at these task execution tools that are often bundled in with project source code today, things like Gradle and NPM. Follow good principles for making your app portable between environments so that running your software locally feels just like running your software in a deployment environment. Standardizing your workstation setup, again, can help with this category too. A lot of these chores that you might prioritize can cut across categories. And then one thing we've had success with is encapsulating those common workflows for developers into a command line interface. There are open source tools such as Oaklip that can help with this kind of thing. On the long term, it may come as no surprise. You're looking at containerization technologies to help out with these sorts of things. So one technology I'm really excited about is cloud native build packs. Sort of vision is getting your application source code containerized in a kind of fully automated way. And of course, you're looking at the sort of like Kubernetes revolution to really get the most power out of this. Let's talk about things you can do to improve your test process. So learning and practicing good testing patterns is something we help clients a lot with here. On the tactical side, that means sort of getting really good with test tools like mocks and fakes. It means if not Martin Fowler's testing pyramid, coming to some conclusion as a team on what kinds of tests we need and at what level and how many of each and what our expectations are and when we use those. And simply a good refactoring and design patterns in code can help make your code more testable as well. In the long run, we work with a lot of clients to help make test-driven development and pair programming a really strategic tool to help incentivize a lot of these good patterns. And we also contribute and support a lot of tools and frameworks that incentivize these patterns too, such as the entire Spring ecosystem and Jasmine on the JavaScript side. On the code side, we mentioned code linting in one of our examples. There's some evidence that just standardizing on code style is one of the things that predicts readability in code bases. So using tools to automatically check that sort of thing can be a big help. Hold on, I'm getting some
problems.
I'm showing some standby for just a moment.
What's happening? Let's see.
Writing API docs or getting into a habit of contract testing. And again, just using tools and frameworks that support good integration can be helpful here too. And in the long term, things that can really move the needle on this are making a really collaborative culture across teams. So that means things like distributed source control in general is
skip ahead. You can go check out the full webinar.
And same on production support. There are a few things you can do to catch things before they get into production.
So that's fun. There's I was writing to one of my coworkers that we should make a white paper out of this or a blog, especially this part that lists kind of like common tech debt issues. And it'd be fun to pick some of these and go through the full cycle of how you identified and evaluated and kind of like worked on one of these issues. Kind of like that chart that we saw in the beginning. But there's all sorts of chores that are listed here. Let's see. Tips for developers. Your chores are bets. Let's go fast forward a little bit here. Okay, that's good. Let's see what happens.
First, we should recognize that the chores you write in your backlog are bets. You don't know with 100% certainty that undergoing a particular activity will reduce your tech debt in a certain area.
Well, sure.
But this is nothing new. Product teams make decisions off of assumptions all the time. When you estimate a feature story, you assume that the complexity, effort, and uncertainty you perceive when you point the story will actually pan out as you're delivering it. And similarly, when you release a beta product, you assume that the findings from a small group can be extrapolated to a larger user base. So I'd encourage you to think of the output of the tech debt audit as another bet that helps you make product decisions.
Yeah, and as far as the what you can do as a developer to increase collaboration, you can invite your PM to your audit to facilitate or just to listen in. If you use our chore template, you'll get good at this, but it's good to justify what chores you want to do. Communicate and justify which aspects of your tech debt a proposed chore would improve. You should get buy-in from other developers. If it only helps you, if it only makes sense to you, it could make things worse. You should not disappear on your PM. Report back to them about progress and blockers on a daily cadence, and let them help you keep that scope small. And finally, don't force context on your PM. Don't require them to know everything that's going on in order to contribute to tech debt reduction. Translate those technical nuances into outcomes or observables.
And on the PM side, you should emphasize outcomes over implementation. So one of the strongest tools in a PM's toolkit is their ability to focus a team around an outcome rather than a solution. And we already do this when nudging the team away from discussing implementation details when pointing feature stories. So similarly, we can leverage this skill when writing chores to help the team focus on fixing the problem at hand rather than implementing cool technology X. We can help keep chores small in scope. So another PM superpower is keeping stories small in scope, which is writing the smallest feature that can deliver a complete piece of value. This helps you prioritize more nimbly and validate assumptions sooner. The same line of thinking should be applied to chores. What's the smallest activity your team can do to impact your development practice? You'll learn if you're going in the right direction before dedicating more time to addressing this tech debt category. And if priorities change, you'll be able to shift direction more easily. You should also consider the product lifecycle. You should balance addressing tech debt and delivering features in each iteration. But the balance depends on where you are in your product lifecycle and the outcomes you're trying to achieve right now. So if you want to get fast feedback and learn if there's a market for your product idea, you might decide to tackle tech debt later on once you establish product market fit. But for later stage products, production support becomes all the more critical. And so you might want to prioritize robustness in this category instead. And finally, empathize with your developers. Ask to sit side by side with your developers for part of the day to better understand their workflow. Think of this like customer research. So what are their pain points? How can you help solve them while still addressing the business need? So in conclusion, we hope you walk away today with the following takeaways. Keep tech debt low by continually addressing sources of toil.
So that part's good. It gets back to the, I think the word I was looking for earlier is you want to institutionalize doing this, not just have it be some random on-demand thing, because then it's easier not to do it. Whereas if you always have in your way of thinking that we need to be reducing toil, then it's just something that you do. It becomes a habit. All these fancy words for describing figuring out ways of getting groups of people to do things that they otherwise would not do.
Take ownership of your whole software delivery process. And finally, drive team performance towards low cycle time rather than high velocity to achieve both. We also wanted to let you know that Spring 1 will be all online this year, and you should join us the week of September 1st for a new virtual conference experience. You can submit your proposals until May 20th at spring1.io. And last but not least, we want to thank these folks who helped us with this webinar.
That's nice.
Really Accrue tech debt. And when to know presentation. I believe you may be able to share this presentation as a PDF probably after this presentation, so you shouldn't have to sign in with that. Also, the spreadsheet that was also included in the attachments, you shouldn't need to sign into your Google account, but we'll look into that after this presentation, and anyone should be able to view that.
There you go. So you do have the tool to use.
So with that being said, let's get through some of the questions here. So this
There's
question here is for you, Susie.
This goes all the way
how
to...
can my team best decide when to deliberately accrue tech debt and when to knuckle down and avoid adding to it?
Sure. So I think it goes back to what I just shared. Let me pull out the slide in the tips for PMs, right? So I think it really depends on where you are in your product lifecycle and what your short-term priorities are. So if you're focused on validating an assumption, running a really critical experiment to your business, perhaps you have.
She already answered that question.
I do believe that in every iteration you should.
Questions regarding tech debt. Is there a good way to reach out to you guys, or who should they reach out to directly?
That's fine.
Great question. I think ultimately.
What was it?
Any questions anyone might have? Is there a way, AJ, to write our email addresses somewhere that's accessible to this audience?
Sure, I can share that in the post-event email, so folks will be able to see your email address after the fact.
Great.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. Question here for Tyson. Who should own and drive the tech debt audit process?
Sure. I think that's a great question. I think ultimately, the team owns their tech debt. Ultimately, I think the developers are going to drive the conversation forward about how to address those various.
That's kind of fun to think about who owns the debt, to use the metaphor. I suppose if the team of developers did a good enough job kind of like quantifying the debt, putting a value on it, and then gave someone else the decision, like, do you want us to spend our time on this tech debt stuff, or would you rather spend the time on, this more business-facing feature stuff? You could say that the person who made that decision is the one who owns that debt. The metaphors get weird because you can own it, whatever. Who is responsible for that because they made the decision not to do it. Of course, the developers are the ones who have to do the work, but like, it's fun. It would be fun to kind of have someone other than the developers like carry this number of the debt, the credit, not the credit, the like the loan that they'd gotten, the debt, and see how that kind of affects things if it's out of the hands of the developers and it's kind of on someone else's head, so to speak.
Sources of tech debt, and they're going to be the source of information amongst each other about what's painful, right? I think that I've seen it work a couple different ways. I've seen developers really value that time as a team, to talk amongst themselves with nobody else in the room, to really to kind of have frank and candid conversations around their tech debt.
Sure.
I've also seen success with PMs facilitating the kind of an audit review session where they help contribute to. They use their PM toolkit, as Susie put it, to contribute ideas for how to keep scope small and ask the right questions. Ultimately, I think the team owns and drives that tech debt audit process. I think what's important is that audit, act, repeat. Establish that feedback loop. Do a little bit every day, and practice that campfire rule of leaving things a little bit better than you found them, week to week.
Great. Thank you, Tyson. We do have a few more questions coming in. Before we get to those, I just want to remind the folks on the call, please don't forget to rate this session. Let us know how we did. Let us know what you'd want to hear at our next event. And this will better give us the content to give you the best
you should
outcomes
rate this
and success in future. So there's
the
another question here for Susie. How can we frame the importance of tackling tech debt to a product owner who is very
in the videos
focused?
my kids watch? I would never watch videos like that.
I'd like to go back to the sample responses. Just a moment while I share my screen.
I was talking and I missed the question.
The best outcomes and success in future. So there's another question here for Susie. How can we frame the importance of tackling tech debt to a product owner who is very feature focused?
Sure. I'd like to go back to
see how they
the sample responses. Just a moment while I share my screen. Okay, so here in the sample responses, once your team actually completes the survey, you'll see this area where you can say if your team delivers a certain number of points per iteration, basically it takes the input of this data, and based on changes to the scores in each category, you can kind of predict the number of points that you would gain or lose depending on how the points change for the answers. So I think this is a really good way to communicate.
All right, and still, we need to go figure out like how these things are tied together, like what formula they're going through to figure things out.
To product owners who are more feature focused to say, look, if we put in the time and effort now to, for instance, run our software locally and improve the process there, we think we can represent a change of, in this case, it's 0.57, but I think a more convincing argument would be 1 point or higher, to say that for every iteration, we could deliver 1 more point or 2 more points or 3 more.
Which is based on time, basically, right? The time you save by addressing these chores, which, hopefully people would understand that if you have more time, you can do more valuable work. But I guess also you can't really, I think that's the main thing that I think is valuable here is a model, a system of way to model a numeric value around doing, as they call it, a chore. And that way you can compare it to other things. That's the other power of a story point, is it becomes, you can relate it to other tasks that you have for planning. You also you need value point, which is kind of what's going on here too, right? Like, it's kind of interesting.
Points. So I think that conveys the importance of paying down this tech debt now to ultimately deliver more features later on and more consistently.
Mm-hmm. A feature now or more features tomorrow?
Great. Thank you, Susie. Looks like we have a few more questions here. Just speaking to Tyson, we do have an updated link, so I'll update that after the presentation, so you'll be able to view that without having to log into your Google account. Just look through here. We have some comments from the team. Thank you for the thoughtful presentation. Thank you for today's presentation. We're starting to see some feedback come in as well.
That's nice.
All right. With that being said, I think we can wrap up. Before we say our final goodbyes, I do want to just remind everyone on the call as well that Spring 1.
All right. We don't need to see their final goodbyes. I mean, it was nice. It's time for my final goodbye. If you want to, if you enjoyed that and you've been watching this far, you'll probably like all these other videos that we have. You can go to the archives that we have for Tanzu Talk. If you go to tanzutalk.com, click on the videos link. As I say, I should fix this so you don't have to go to the videos thing. But we also have the podcast there. I've got a good 3-part series for the podcast, probably videos here too lined up that hopefully we'll be doing in the next sort of 4 weeks or so, or publishing. It's great. It'll be one of the organizations we work with, and kind of the story of how they started doing software differently, the applications and some applications that they worked on. I'm really looking forward to it. And also some DevSecOps stuff in there. But anyways, you can find the archives for this episode, by searching through what's over there at tanzutalk.com, and look through our numerous other episodes. And by our, I mean mine. So you can check that out. And with that, I think I'll wrap things up here. And we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.